Wow. The only thing that matters is that Jesus reigns. That will preach, won't it? I mean, we can almost just do the altar call right now. I want you to think about your life. Think of everything else that's going on. And really, the only thing that matters, the only thing that changes dark skies to bright ones is that Jesus reigns. And for us, we get to live to receive and release God's love to everyone, everywhere. You know, that's what it means to be alive. That's what it means to thrive. And not just once you get to the place that you've figured it out or you're performing well or you're doing well. No, in spite of everything else that you don't feel is finished. Everything in your life that you don't feel is together. Is that me doing that? I'm wearing a sweater. We don't know what to do with that. My one sweater. We'll take a second to fix. Is that better? Is that good? Okay. Here's my sweater. You'll see it again in 2020. It's awesome. I want you to think about this in your life right now. Your life is not about a checklist of thousands of things that you need to do. Your life right now and always is about one thing, and in spite of everything that you don't think is finished or in order or in line yet in your life, you can relax and breathe today because there's a God in heaven that reigns and He knows you completely and He adores you with everything. Even in the midst of your unfinished. You can actually just be in the place where you know Him and live as a recipient of His love and His joy and His peace and His purpose and His forgiveness. And when that happens, when we walk in that place, what we find is that we're receiving so much of that stuff that it's flowing out of us to people who are also unfinished. That we can flow out love to people in spite of who or what or where they are. That's the simple gospel. It's good news, it's profound, and it's where we can live. And this, if this is the mission of our church, this is our daily destination, this is what life can look like, that every day we're living to receive God's love, and every day from that place, we're living to release God's love in spite of what's unfinished. If that's the destination, then our core values would be like the bridge that we walk to get there. It's how we walk with God and how we walk with each other to see this be a reality. And last week, we started sharing about our most foundational core value, that we value intimacy, that friendship with God is our greatest priority, and it's our greatest privilege. And we talked last week about making friendship with God your greatest priority. For the next 2 weeks, I want to get really practical and talk about what the privilege of walking in friendship with God can look like. And if you and I want to know God's desire for us, we really have to go back to God's design. We've got to go all the way back to the beginning. We've got to go back to Eden. And when we go back to the beginning, there's this phrase that God said about us in the garden. It says, and the man and the woman were naked and unashamed. It wasn't the reality TV show He was talking about. To be in the place to be naked and unashamed meant this, that in our relationship with God, in our relationship with one another, there were no secrets because there was nothing to hide. We could hold our heads high, knowing that we had dignity and worth and that we were enough. He fully walked with us and we fully shared our hearts with Him and with each other. But as soon as sin entered the picture, something changed. See, we were still naked, but now suddenly we weren't naked and unashamed. The first consequence of sin was shame. First of all, it was shame with each other. The way we saw each other changed instantly. See, the man looked at the woman, and suddenly he found himself saying, well, wait a second, she was made to be with God, but she chose against Him, and she was also made to be with me. What if she sees some weakness in me and chooses against me too? And so the conclusion in an instant, I can't be weak. The woman looks at the man and says, he was made to protect me, but he stood silently the whole time, knowing that God gave him the command not to eat this fruit, and he said, nothing. I can't allow myself to be vulnerable because the next time he's not going to be there to protect me. We entered into instant insecurity and instant walls. But it wasn't just with each other. Our relationship with God, it changed like this because suddenly the way we saw ourselves changed. Because it's now, I rebelled, I failed, I missed the mark, I messed up, I'm a failure. And Adam and Eve instantly did something about it. They ran, they hid, and they tried desperately to cover themselves. And you know what? We've been doing the same thing ever since. I want you to think about so much of the things that we do or that we think we need. So much of it is our attempt to clothe ourselves from some perceived sense of shame or lack or weakness, or at least to distract ourselves by hiding from it. I want you to think about how the way we go about pursuing accomplishments, the way we require respect. Think about our overly busy schedules, and I would ask this question: what exactly are we trying to hide from? What exactly are we running after? And what is it we're so desperately attempting to cover ourselves with? And maybe a deeper question would be this: how do we let God get past our veil? You see, in Christian circles, we talk a whole lot about the veil that was in the temple that separated man from God, and when Jesus died, that veil was ripped down, which means there's no veil from God's side between you and him. But you know, there's a whole lot of people who've had the veil removed from God's side, and they still have one up on their side every day with God and with each other. When we talk about friendship with God, we've got to ask this question: how do we let God past our veil? There's a reason we chose the word intimacy. We know it freaks some people out. First of all, we chose it because I believe it's thoroughly biblical. The word intimacy means the deepest friendship that you can possibly walk in. And in fact, you want to understand the word intimacy, just break it down. Into me, you see. You want to know what intimacy looks like? It's where you come to God and you say, God, into me, you see. Intimacy requires transparency. As we look this morning, we're going to spend 2 weeks looking practically at what it looks like to walk in friendship with God. This morning, I want to look at our side. When we come and we talk to God. Next week, we're going to talk a lot about God speaking to us. The God of heaven and earth still speaks today. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Jesus' name is the Word, and He's always been speaking to you. So we're going to talk about recognizing His voice and really understanding it. But today, opening up our heart in this intimacy saying, Lord, into me you see. That intimacy requires transparency. That word transparent, it means to allow light to shine all the way through something so that everything can be seen. Right? You hold up something that is transparent, and when you hold it to the light, you can look straight through it. Hopefully most days when you drive, your windshield is transparent. Transparency for us is when we choose to hold our lives up to the one who is the light. And we say, God, in the midst of everything that feels unfinished, in the midst of everything in my own feelings that feels like there needs to be shame, there are going to be no hidden rooms. I hold up my whole heart to you, and I let you into every room, and I let you see through everything. My thoughts, my actions, and my motives. As we talk about what it looks like to communicate with God, it's been funny because as through the years I've walked as a pastor, my wife and I have run into this humorous situation. It can happen with extended family, it can happen with friends or acquaintances, but inevitably what happens is this. We'll show up in a place where something vaguely spiritual is needed. It could be a prayer for a meal, or it could be a ceremony or some type of need, and all of a sudden people look at me and they say, can you pray for it? As if I'm the official spokesperson of heaven when I come in. And the joke is that they come in and they believe that I have some kind of connection with God that they don't and that they can't. On the other side, there's a lot of these same people that will come to me and they'll ask me to pray for them. And it's very different than asking me to pray with them. You see, praying with somebody, I think, is the most biblical thing you can do. We're called to be a family, to bear one another's burdens. So you come and you say, I'm seeking the God of heaven, but I need my family around me. Would you pray with me? That's awesome. But that's not what I'm talking about. See, I'll meet a lot of people that will come and say something like this. Well, listen, Pastor Chuck, of course, you know, I'm going to try to pray too, but I can't say it the way you would say it. And you know, the way you walk with God, I know that He hears you. And when I hear that, I think, oh my gosh, we have got to unchurch prayer. We've churched it up. That's my Christian cuss word of the day, okay? We have churched up prayer. Because we made good people believe that they're not yet equipped or ready to come before God with their heart. And all prayer is at its heart is just you bearing your heart, lifting your life in transparency to your Father, your best friend, and the love of your life. That's all it is. And so I want to talk about two things this morning. I want to talk about our side, walking with God in transparency, and then walking with God in time. But as you look at transparency, you being able to lift your life before God, there's a few tips I want to give for prayer. First of all, I don't believe prayer needs to be given in churchy words. You hear sometimes people come and pray, and they pray something like, Dearest Heavenly Father, thy children beseech thee now for thy tender mercies to partake of these bountiful blessings that thy hands have provided. And it's like, how about just like, hey, the cheeseburger looks amazing. My taste buds rejoice. You did good on that, Jesus. Thank you. Did you know your prayer should sound like, I don't know, you? It's not in churchy words. You know, prayer is also not just about churchy stuff. I think the unspoken thing that happens is we treat prayer like it's this separate category. In fact, I would encourage you not even necessarily to use the word prayer. It's just talking to God. Because we use the word prayer and then we put it in the holy box. We put it in the holy box and then we don't say this, but we think, I don't pray enough. And what we mean is, I don't talk to God about churchy stuff enough. As if that's what prayer actually is. And there's a lot of people that don't feel they can talk to God like their friend because they're like, well, I just don't talk about Bible stuff a whole lot. But, you know, here's the news flash. He's the God of all creation. He made all of it. It was His idea. So that we look at things like romance and laughter and beauty and adventure and stories. He's the creator. He's the one that gave us the capacity and wired our brains for things like coming up with cars and sports and fashion and shopping and entertainment. Guess what? He knows more about it than you do. He's more passionate about it than you are. The reality is there is no sacred and secular. There's only the sacred and the profane. You see, there's a small percentage of things within creation that deeply grieve the heart of God because they're so perverted from His original design. Things like abuse and murder and hatred. We're never going to talk about glorifying God in the midst of your murder, right? That's not going to happen. You have the sacred and you have the profane. And you know what? Here's the interesting thing. In the profane, God calls for us to come and talk to Him with broken hearts, just to come and be with Him. But in the rest of it, if we have this small box called the profane and the rest is sacred, He says, the rest of it, I want you to commune with me. That everywhere you go, whether you eat or you drink or whatever you do, that you're doing all to the glory of God because you can actually be with Him in all of it because guess what? He's in it all. And when you're there, you find that you're praying without ceasing because you're simply interacting with your best friend in the playground He made. Philippians says it this way. It says, don't be pulled in different directions or worried about a thing. Be saturated in prayer throughout each day, offering your faith-filled requests before God with overflowing gratitude. Tell Him every detail of your life. Then God's wonderful peace that transcends human understanding will make the answers known to you through Jesus Christ. Or this verse in Psalms, this is one of my new favorites. It says this, Psalms chapter 62. It says, join me, everyone. In other words, what I'm about to say, it's open for all of us. The gates are wide open. Trust only in God every moment. Tell Him all of your troubles and pour out your heart longings to Him. Believe me when I tell you, He will help you. You know, prayer is not just about your problems and your confessions and your needs. He says, bring those. I want those. Bring your needs. Bring your questions. Bring your doubts. But no more than that, what I really want, I want your heart longings. If it matters to you, it matters to me. And that word friendship means to sit on the couch. God says, I just want to sit next to you and just be with you and hear every longing of your heart over and over and over again. You know, I used to hate prayer. I never said it out loud. But I avoided prayer like it was the plague. And the reason was because I viewed prayer as Chuck's bloopers and fails. Prayer was the time where I went to God to tell Him how badly I've screwed up again. I messed up this, and I messed up that, and I'm doubting you in this, and I can't see that. And can you just wonder why I wasn't pounding down the doors to go for prayer time? Who would want to be in a friendship like that? Who would want to go in a friendship where every time they're like, the agenda today is we're going to talk about what a loser you are. And then we're done talking, you tell me enough, and then when you feel bad enough, then our time will be done. You know, for a lot of people, that's how they view prayer. But what if God doesn't see it all the way we see? What if the person who's so hard on you is you? Any parents in the room? Parents, you ever have a kid that is being a whole lot more down on themselves than you could ever possibly be? And it's so frustrating because you just want them to move on. It's like they told you what they did, and you dealt with it, and you forgave them, and it's been like 3 days, and they're moping around, and every time you look at them, they're about to break down in tears, and they're like, but it's just, I took the cookie, and you said don't take the cookie, and good children shouldn't take the cookie, and you want to give the words from that theologian Elsa, let it go, let it go. I mean, you just want, please. Can I just submit to you that maybe that's you and God? See, it's you that are replaying all the time your blooper and your fail reel. That's not playing in heaven. He already separated that as far as the east is from the west, drowned it in the sea of forgetfulness. That's you replaying it, and it's the enemy loving it and wanting you to call that prayer and communion. But what if God let it go, and He sees you so much more deeply than you see yourself, and He just wants you to come and bring all of your heart, not in churchy words and not just about churchy stuff. But this other side of transparency, I'd say, we've got to stop looking at prayer as churchy methods. I don't know about you, but when I started getting into church, we have all these tools to help equip how do you talk to God and how do you go. And I remember sitting in Bible college and hearing these messages about how you needed to connect with God. And one of the speakers came and he said, the Psalms say, early in the morning I seek you, God. And so godly men and women, if you really hunger and thirst for God, then you're going to get up before the sun's up, and the first thing you're going to do is talk to God because that's how you give Him your first. And I said, well, he sure seems passionate, and I'm new at this. That must be the right way to do it. And so I tried to reset my schedule earlier in the morning as somebody who's not naturally a morning person. And I was on my face before the Lord, but I guarantee you it was not prayer that was taking place. I would show up at my classes completely exhausted after an on again, off again, one sentence, sleep for 10 minutes, one sentence, sleep for 15 minutes. And then, instead of actually feeling like I did something well, it's Chuck has failed again, which means, guess what? Highlighted my afternoon prayer session. I'm so sorry I wasn't passionate enough about you too early in the morning. Seek you. It went further, and the new in vogue thing became journaling. And so everybody said, no, if you really, love the Lord, you got to journal. You got to get a journal. You got to write it down. You got to record all your thoughts. That's what the Psalms are anyway. You got to do like David did. So I was like, okay, that's what holy people do. Now here's the deal, though. If you've ever listened to me speak more than 5 minutes, you know my word count per minute is insane. You know what I got during journaling? Writer's cramp. That was it. It's like I can't keep up with everything going on in my heart, and I didn't connect with God there. And again, I felt like a failure. Another speaker came and said, listen, there's an acronym to help you pray. It's ACTS. You start with adoration. You spend some time first telling God how much you adore Him, and then you spend a time of confession of what you've done wrong. I was like, I know that one. Then you go to thanksgiving, what you want to thank God for. I could never keep clear with the difference between adoration and thanksgiving. It was just 2 times me going, God, you're awesome. But I did it because that was the order, and it spelled Acts, which is a book in the Bible, so it must be holy. And then the last one was supplication, which is where you ask God for your needs. And it turned into a lifeless checklist that I never looked forward to. I found myself some days starting to feel my heart longing going in this direction, but the next thing I needed to talk about was confession. And I was like, well, what's something I need to come up with to confess? Because clearly I must have done something wrong. Other speakers came and told us about prayers of confessions or praying the 23rd Psalm or the Lord's Prayer or putting on every piece of spiritual armor or this 40-day program or this 40-day fast. And I want to be really clear in what I'm saying. I'm not knocking any of these. Every one of those godly men and women that stood before me were sharing what worked for them. The problem is there's 7.5 billion stories on the planet and there's never been another you. You can't make your life fit somebody else's program, and when you try, what you'll find is that it'll feel lifeless. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I told you I was at the place where I looked at prayer as some other thing that I just wasn't passionate about and I didn't want to do it. And I would imagine if I asked for a show of hands of how many people view prayer the same way, hands would come up. And here's what happens. The enemy is a punk. Because he's a punk, what he's going to do is he's going to come in your head and he's going to say, the problem is you don't love or want God enough. Anybody ever felt that one before? Let's deal with that one for 30 seconds, okay? Here's the deal. God by his very nature is God. He's higher than all things. He has all quality. You can't possibly want something more than you want God. Which means the most hardened atheist who shows up, when the enemy says you don't want God, no, you're starving for God. You're just feeding yourself the wrong thing. The very definition of what it is to be God is the one who is higher above everything else. Every human being has been wired for him. So this whole idea of you don't want God or you don't love God, no, you're just simply feasting in the wrong place. So that's never going to be the issue of your heart. But beyond that, what I would say for Christians who hear you don't love God enough and shut down, I would say, no, what if instead you're trying to pray in words and by a method and in a way God never made you to pray? And you actually just need to learn how to share your heart before him as you. I mean, how weird would it be if your best friend suddenly came and talked to you and said, listen, we've got some new rules from now on. This is what's going to happen. I now want you to speak to me in a highly technical language that you don't use anywhere else in the rest of your life except between us. I want you to follow a checklist for every moment that we have together, and I want you to log how much time we spend doing anything, and I want to make sure that it's more time than you spend doing anything else. How much longer are you going to be hanging out with that friend? Is it any wonder why people are struggling with prayer with God? Here's the reality. As you and I see who God really is, that he's really everywhere in everything, that he adores us, that he knows us, that he's come to fill us with joy in the midst of our weakness, that he's not offended by our shortcomings, but he's actually drawn to them, you know what we're going to find? We're going to be canceling appointments. We're going to be trading binge watching for binge talking. I promise you. Because who wouldn't want to be around that all the time? I want you to think for just a minute. How do you talk to your closest friends? How do you share your heart? That's actually how it should look with God. Your friendship with God should be as unique as you are. For Pastor Lynn, when he connects with God, it's sitting in his hot tub later at night, and he'll read through ministry articles. For me, it's the complete opposite. I require time and I require space. You put me out in the field, you give me space, and you don't talk to me, and I'm going to be good, or I'm going to sit and I'm going to have my cup of coffee. It's not about what's right and wrong. It's about what's you and what's not you. And the first thing God actually wants when we come to him is for you to come as you, hiding nothing. Intimacy requires transparency. But the second part, and this is where I really want to get practical for a minute this morning, is that intimacy requires time. As we think about the pace of our lives, so many of us are so busy. Todd White says that we're all in a hurry to get nowhere. And if you think about it, if God has really fully paid everything, if he fully adores us in the midst of our weakness, and if at this moment all the fruit we're ever going to bear is just coming from stillness with him, what in the world are we running so fervently after? Not only are we so busy, we are so good at multitasking, aren't we? I mean, you're watching TV while you're listening to a song, while you're texting a friend, while you're playing a game on your tablet, and this is normal. And for many of us, there's not moments of stillness and quiet where nothing else is going on. And if we're being honest, the great need of our life is we need margin and we need to breathe. If we look to Jesus as our model and our example, see, Jesus came not as God to earth. Jesus came as man. It says that he emptied himself of his divinity, and he came as the second Adam. Why? So that we would look at his relationship with God and know that's what he was opening the door for us to do. So when you watch how Jesus relates with the Father, that's what the door has been opened for you and I to do with the Father. And there's a number of verses that talk about this, but one of my favorites is in Luke 5, and this talking about Jesus' life, and it's just hidden away, and it says this. It says, the news about Jesus spread all the more so that crowds of people came to hear about him and be healed of their sicknesses. So think about this. Why did Jesus come? He came that humanity could be back with God, that they could find the joy, that they could find the hope. He said, I came to preach this good news everywhere I go. The start says, Jesus was killing it. He's doing so great that success is literally chasing him down. Everywhere he shows up, news is spreading more. People are booking more appointments. People are wanting more time with him. More. And you're going, but it's all good. What's the next thing say? But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. I'll note a few things. One, prayer is not always somber about your fail reel, because Jesus didn't have a fail reel, and he always went to talk to the Father, right? Can't just be about your failures and your weaknesses. It says that Jesus often withdrew, that this was a normal part of the perfect Son of God's life. What if prayer isn't about us going to share how we screwed up, but what if prayer is actually about intimacy? What if it's actually about forming a best friendship? And what if Jesus, because he recognized, think about your best friend, part of what you rarely say, here's my best friend, I haven't seen him or talked to him in 30 years, we don't ever talk, we don't ever catch up, we don't ever coordinate with one another at all, best friends. No, that's not true. You see, a best friendship is formed in moments and in time and in trust. Jesus often withdrew. That word withdrew, I love this one. It means to draw back and create space to receive something. So Jesus often, in the midst of the busyness of life, had to draw back. What does that mean? Life didn't stop for him. Circumstances didn't align. That's how we talk, though, isn't it? I'm just in a busy season right now. How long has that been going on? 35 years. Right? It's just a busy season. But what I'm believing is the stars are going to align and suddenly everybody's going to respect my schedule and what God's called me to. Nope, Jesus said, they're pressing in more, they're pressing in more, they're pressing in more. So what do I have to do often as a normal part of my life? I have to step back from everything else in life, that's what it means, to create space to receive something. What he's talking about is uninterrupted time. It's a time where Jesus shows up to the Father and says, because you're more dear to me than anything else right now, I am completely unavailable. I remember before the time I went to Naples, I always struggled with, I got to do this, 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 I got to do this. When God really shook and changed my life there, he changed my perspective, that I recognized and said, no, you know what? The only fruit that has ever come in my life, the only joy, the only peace, the only way I ever see myself clearly is when I'm on my knees before him. And suddenly that took the top slot, and I said, if I don't do anything else, I've got to spend copious amounts of uninterrupted time the way God made me, not as a discipline, but as knowing my best friend. And that word lonely, we don't like the word lonely, but it means desolate, solitary, and uninhabited. It's not something we do in the midst of multitasking with lots of other noise going on. It's a place where we just draw alone to share our hearts with him. And he shares it with us, and according to Jesus, it should be taking place often. That word lonely also means uncultivated. And I love this because if you look at uncultivated land, it's land that doesn't have an agenda or a plan. It's wild. I can think about many times that I came in my relationship with the Lord, desperately wanting him to move. And here's the thing, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, but he's always moving you from glory to glory, which means the God of the universe sometimes moves. That's why he says to seek him in this secret place. There are going to be times and places where there's something that God moved in your life doing yesterday that suddenly today isn't working anymore. Anybody been there? Where you were reading your Bible this way. I can think about a period of time where I was reading a daily Bible that was you read through it, the chapters, and you get through in a year. And there was a number of years I'd done this in a row, and suddenly one morning I got up, and it was like, God's not here, and I'm in the Bible. And so first the enemy did that whole punk, you don't love God enough, there must be unconfessed sin in your life, there must be. And then I said, you know what? No, it's a discipline. I just need to press on and I just need to go through it. And sometimes, that's true, we shouldn't trust our feelings. But finally it got to the place where I simply had to ask the question, God, have you moved? And he said, oh yeah, a long time ago. What if there's complete freedom? And what if when you come to God in that uninterrupted time, you don't have to cultivate the land? You get to just come show up and be and clear the space and say, Lord, I just want to share my heart with you. Just one more scripture I want to share, and then I want to get very practical. In Galatians chapter 5, it says, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. It's God saying, I want to walk with you, but I'm moving, and I need you to stay with me. We have a large family, and so when we travel places with our kids, that's something they regularly hear. Stay with me, stay with me, stay with me. Look at me, where are you going? We're walking. We institute the buddy system in our family, right? So this person's eyes are on this person and this person, and it works pretty well for us, except for one of our children. My son Gabriel. My son Gabriel gets in this place where he loves the wonder of the world around him, and sometimes he'll find himself just in his own world. It's a happy place, but he's not hearing anything else you're saying. He's not seeing anything else you're doing. He's wrapped up in his own mind. 3 times at Disney World, we've completely lost the same child, Gabriel, and sent us into a complete panic. I want to say this. God doesn't ever lose where you are. But when you try to get through life trapped in your own mind, leaning on your own strength, you lose your bearings. And the God of heaven wants to move with you at every moment, but you can't write it down to some system of man. You've got to be at the place where you recognize that he didn't make anyone else like you, and that he's moving, and that all he wants is all of your heart longings. How do we do that? I'll give you a picture. Brenda, can you pull that picture up of the redwood tree? If you had the chance to go out to California, these are some of the redwoods, which are pretty magnificent and amazing when you look at them. Redwood trees can grow to be almost 400 feet tall and weigh 1.6 million pounds. And you've got to ask the question, in fact, many scientists have asked the question, how does a redwood tree grow to be like that? And they found 2 factors that allow a redwood tree to stand the way it is. The first one is this, the soil that it's in. Redwood trees thrive in areas that flood regularly. In areas regularly that storms are coming, that difficulties are coming, literally they are recipients of overflow. And as they simply stay planted over time, the soil around them is getting enriched. I just want to say this as a side note. Many of the times when storms come in our life and we wonder, God, where are you? God, where are you? God, where are you? He's enriching your soil. Just stay planted. It's time. These redwood trees, many of them have stood 2,000 years in the same place. Intimacy requires time. We've got to make margin and say, God, you're the most important thing in my life, and practice